It was an ordinary Tuesday, or at least it pretended to be. The kind of day that slips past you if you're not careful. Quiet, gray, with the kind of overcast sky that presses its weight onto your shoulders. The vacuum hummed beside me like white, noise for my thoughts, drowning out the clatter of memory. I was tidying up our bedroom, not because it was messy, but because I needed something, anything, to feel in control. His drawer was open, again, always half open, as if he could never finish anything completely, just like his promises, just like us. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. I was picking up his forgotten receipts, shuffling through old cufflinks and a tangled watch chain when I saw it. A small box, velvet blue, tucked in the back corner like it had been buried beneath the weight of daily life. At first, I smiled. It had been a while since we'd shared anything tender. Maybe, just maybe, it was a surprise, an apology, a rekindling of something burned low. But the second I opened it, I knew. It wasn't mine. The ring was dainty, too dainty. The kind of thing you'd give someone new, someone you hadn't yet figured out. A thin gold band with a diamond that barely caught the light. Simple. Safe. Nothing like the bold vintage piece he proposed with on a freezing February afternoon in Prague. No, this was not for a woman like me. My fingers were shaking before I noticed the receipt, folded and tucked beneath the satin lining. I opened it with the same dread one might open a letter from a hospital or a lawyer. The date, last week. The handwriting inside the lid, to my future. My breath caught in my throat. My vision blurred, then sharpened into something crystalline. Pain has a way of making everything vivid, like the world wants to make sure you really see it all fall apart. I placed the ring back. Every corner of the receipt folded precisely as it had been. The drawer slid shut with a soft click. The vacuum was still running when I left the room. That night, he came home later than usual. He smelled like cedarwood and something sweet. Not my perfume, not mine at all. We sat across from each other at the dinner table, the clink of cutlery on ceramic the only conversation we had. He chewed absent-mindedly, scrolling his phone between bites, eyes half-lidded with distraction. "You seen my gray tie?" he asked suddenly, not looking up. I stared at him, at his hands, at the slight wrinkle at the corner of his eyes when he was tired, details I once adored, now catalogued like evidence. "No," I said. He nodded and returned to scrolling. That was it. No guilt, no hesitation, no sense that the axis of my world had shifted violently beneath my feet. He was already somewhere else, in his mind, in his body, maybe even in another bed. But what he didn't know, what he never bothered to consider, was that I watched. I noticed, always had. Passwords, bank statements, the way his voice changed when he was lying. He underestimated me. He always did. I sat awake that night long after he'd gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath our weightless marriage. The wedding photo on the mantel caught my eye. Us, 10 years ago. He looked so sure of himself. I looked like I still belonged to myself. I traced the curve of my wedding ring with my thumb. It suddenly felt like a prop in a play I hadn't agreed to star in. That blue velvet box had said everything. He couldn't or wouldn't, and yet he had no idea what I knew. What I was capable of. Let him think I was clueless. Let him believe he was winning. For now. Before him, I had a different name for myself. Not literally, of course, but inside. I was Elle, the version of me that drank espresso too late. At night, that wore red lipstick on weekdays, who bookmarked flights to Paris and kept sketches of exhibit layouts tucked between bills and bus passes. That Elle was hungry, for beauty, for ambition, for a kind of quiet power I thought came from doing what I loved. Then came James. He entered my world the way a thunderstorm rolls in on a hot August afternoon, loud, unmissable. I met him at a fundraising gala at the museum. He was a donor. I was the youngest curator on staff. He liked my fire. I liked his certainty. He was older, 12 years. Wealthy in the kind of way that seemed to bend the room around him. Confident, decisive. The kind of man who didn't ask what wine you liked. He ordered for the table. Back then, I thought that meant he was strong, that he would protect me from the jagged edges of the world. I mistook control for love, protection for possession. It started with a compromise. The Fulbright I'd earned for a year in Paris, an art preservation fellowship that would have launched my career, came just after our 6-month mark. He said he'd miss me too much, said long distance never worked, that we were too good together, to put in jeopardy. "I can give you Paris later," he whispered, brushing hair behind my ear, "but I can't bear to lose you now." So I stayed, and I told myself I'd made a choice, that I had agency, that love sometimes meant turning around. We moved in together a month later, a sleek townhouse with cold marble counters and floor-to-ceiling windows. His world was made of chrome and leather. Mine had been soft cotton, chipped paint, and secondhand books. At first I tried to blend them. I hung fairy lights, framed art prints, lit candles that smelled like fig trees and cedar. But one by one the lights came down. The prints got replaced with modern abstracts he bought to match the walls. The candles gave him headaches, he said. Little sacrifices, I told myself. Just part of growing up. When we married, I wore my mother's veil and my father's watch, wrapped around my wrist like a secret. James said the ceremony should be elegant, not sentimental. I still slipped the watch on beneath my sleeve. It was the last piece of myself I wore for years. After the wedding, the ask came quietly. He didn't demand. He never had to. "You hate the museum politics," he said one night, his hand trailing my thigh under the dinner table. "You could help me instead. Be my partner." He meant assistant, hostess, shadow. So I quit. I told my friends I was taking a break. Told my parents it was temporary. I needed time, I said. Space to realign my priorities. Everyone nodded politely, but my sister Rachel looked at me across the table and said softly, "You're disappearing." "I'm growing," I replied. I was lying. We both knew it. Time softened the panic. The months became years. I memorized the smell of dry cleaning and cigar boxes. I learned to recognize investor moods by their shoes. I smiled through gallery openings I used to curate. I posed beside James in tailored dresses I didn't choose, in shoes that pinched. Clients loved me. James said I made him look good, that I was the perfect woman, composed, lovely, supportive. I held his secrets. I soothed his rages. I made the home, but I wasn't in it. My reflection faded slowly, like an old photo left in sunlight. I remember one morning, catching myself in the mirror while brushing my hair. The woman looking back at me had impeccable posture and flawless makeup, but her eyes were vacant, like she'd been edited in after the fact. I barely recognized myself, but I was too tired to look away. Then Madison was hired. She was 26. Crisp blouses, tight skirts, perfume that lingered long after she left a room, peony and sugar. I remember it well because it clashed horribly with my jasmine body oil, the one James used to compliment, back when he still noticed. At first, I thought she was just new, eager. She called him Sir, which made me laugh, until I saw the way she lingered after meetings, The unnecessary late nights. The jokes she shared with him in low tones I wasn't meant to hear. He changed his phone. Password. Switched from saying, "I'll be home by 8" to, "Don't wait up." I told myself I was being paranoid. That this was stress. Hormones. That every wife in every magazine column had these thoughts now and then. That love meant endurance. Marriage meant trust. So I buried it. I smiled through dinners. I wore the necklace he gave me for our anniversary like armor. I held his arm tighter in public, just to remind the world I was still there. Still his. But I wasn't. Not really. The night I found the ring, it all cracked open. Not just the betrayal, but the years. All the parts of myself I had given away in pieces, like coins dropped into a wishing well that never gave anything back. My sister had once asked, "What would happen if you just left?" I laughed. Told her she didn't understand. But now I understood what she meant. Because when you have nothing left of yourself, leaving isn't the hard part. It's remembering who you were before you gave it all away. I didn't sleep after finding the ring. Not that first night. Not the second. I lay beside him in bed, listening to his breathing. The steady rise and fall. That faint rasp on the exhale I used to find comforting. Now it just made my skin crawl. I watched the ceiling as the shadows shifted, and somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., I decided, if I couldn't sleep, I'd search. Not for peace. Not for closure, but for proof. I didn't start with drawers. I started with the glowing blue light of his laptop charger on the dresser. The one he thought I never touched. He was wrong. The password hadn't changed. I think part of me hoped it had, but it hadn't. Still our wedding date, in that smug, sentimental way he thought women liked. It felt like a betrayal all its own. How easy it was to open his world. Inside, I didn't even have to dig deep. Just follow the threads. There were emails first, tame at first glance. Subject lines like investment strategy and Q4 legal. But once I opened the attachments, the floor began to give way beneath me. Spreadsheets, letters, names I didn't recognize, and dates. Stretching back over a year. There it was. A trust account, held in his name only. The routing matched a boutique offshore bank. My stomach clenched. I clicked into the transactions. Thousands transferred every few weeks. Always small enough to fly under radar, but regular enough to be intentional. I knew those deposits. They came from our joint account, from my inheritance. When my mother passed, I put that money into the business. For us, for our future. I let him handle it because I didn't want to be the suspicious wife. Because I believed in him. Now I saw the truth. He was draining me slowly, methodically, with the precision of a butcher, not a lover. The deeper I went, the sicker I felt. There were property transfers. Our vacation condo in Carmel? Transferred into a shell company. Retirement accounts restructured into funds that no longer bore my name. Even the house, my house, technically belonged to a business entity I didn't realize existed. I stared at the digital deed, blinking, willing the name to change. But it didn't. On paper, I was nothing more than a ghost, a dependent. No assets. No equity, just a name on a monogrammed pillowcase, and then I found it. The final punch to the ribs, a folder labeled Contingency Documents. Inside, a draft prenup. Unfiled, unsigned, but dated, 6 months before we even married. It outlined everything. His separate assets, the expectation of non-marital, contribution, the waivers for spousal support. And in the accompanying email to his lawyer, there was a line I will never forget. no matter how many years pass. If things proceed with Madison, I'd prefer to have this squared away. Ideally by Q3 separation. I read it again. And again. And again. Madison. Not just a fling. Not just a phase. A plan. A replacement. That's when my body gave out. I crawled to the kitchen, barely making it to the sink before I vomited. The floor was cold tile against my knees. I stayed there, clutching the edge of the counter like it might save me. And then I cried. The kind of crying that doesn't have shape. No gasps. No wails. Just water leaking out of you because your soul has nothing left to hold it. I wasn't a person in that moment. I was a ruin. Somewhere between sobs, I noticed the ring again. Not the one in the drawer, the one on my hand. A cushion-cut diamond in platinum, set in a band he designed. I used to think it was beautiful. Now it felt like a shackle. I twisted it off and placed it gently on the marble counter. It sat there under the low light like a lie exposed. He didn't get to do this. He didn't get to write me out of my own life, like a scene he no longer found useful. I wiped my face with the dish towel. My hands were still trembling, but my breath slowed. That's when something shifted. Something inside me. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something smaller but sharper. Clarity. I poured myself a glass of water. Sat at the dining room table with his laptop and a portable drive I found in the junk drawer. The same one I used to back up photo albums and recipes. This time, I used it to download my resurrection. File by file. Account statements, transaction logs, legal correspondence. I learned how to take screenshots on a Mac faster than I ever cared to before. I opened the browser history, checking every autofill field, saving cached passwords. I found email drafts that were never sent, calendar notes marked with code, a meeting titled simply 11 a.m. in future. I copied everything. He'd counted on me not paying attention, on me staying soft, staying silent. But what he didn't understand, what men like him never understand, is that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is the sound of a fuse. By the time the sun came up, I had 2 full backups. One on a flash drive I tucked into an old tin, buried in the back of my underwear drawer. One uploaded to the cloud, disguised inside an album labeled Garden Inspiration. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. Like I used to drink it before he told me it was too bitter. And as I sipped, watching the light climb the far kitchen wall, I realized something strange. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He came down an hour later. Shirt unbuttoned, hair still damp from the shower. Looked at me with that vague, distracted affection he reserved for well-trained pets. "Morning, babe," he said, walking past to grab his protein shake. I didn't answer. He didn't notice. Just stood there, scrolling his phone, sipping slowly. I studied his profile, the slope of his jaw, the expensive watch, the faint red mark on his neck that looked suspiciously like a lipstick smear. A version of me, the one still stitched with hope, might have looked away, pretended, delayed the storm, but that version of me was gone. I watched him walk out the door with a briefcase full of lies and a smile shaped like betrayal, and I thought, he has no idea who he just left behind. I left on a Wednesday. He thought I was going to visit my sister. I even let him see me pack. "Give her my best," he said, distracted, knotting his tie in the hallway mirror. He kissed the top of my head, like a man who thought the ground beneath him was still solid. I kissed him back. My suitcase was small, carry-on sized. I only packed what I needed: clean clothes, my grandmother's necklace, the external drive with every file I'd copied, and the old backup phone he didn't know about. I left the ring behind, gleaming in the tray on my nightstand, I didn't look back when I closed the front door. I didn't need to. I was done with that house. The road north curved like a quiet question through the hills. Each mile put distance between me and the life I had pretended to belong to. The city gave way to silence, buildings to trees. I rolled down the windows, let the wind tangle my hair, and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully. The cottage sat nestled in a bowl of pine trees, 2 hours outside of town. The roof sagged a little. Paint peeled in the corners. It smelled like cedar and dust and old dreams. Once, long ago, he gave it to me as a wedding gift, back when promises still felt sacred. But somewhere between refinancing and retitling, the deed had quietly slipped from my name. I remembered finding the updated paperwork one night in the office printer. Streamlining assets, he said. But he forgot one thing. He never changed the locks. I still had the key. Inside, it was like stepping into a photograph of my old self. Worn wooden beams, linen curtains that fluttered in the breeze. The easel in the corner still held the canvas I'd abandoned years ago, a rough sketch of the lake at dusk. I ran my fingers over it like a ghost touching her own memory. It had been ours, once. A weekend place. A retreat. But somewhere along the way, it became just another tax write-off. To me, it was sanctuary. I set my bag down in the living room and didn't unpack. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the old wool rug and let the stillness wrap around me. For the first time in forever, no one was asking for anything. No meetings, no dinners, no curated smiles. Just me. Just silence. And in that silence, I broke. The sobs came fast and messy, like a dam giving way. I cried for the girl I used to be, for the dreams I shelved, for the voice I quieted so many times it forgot its own shape. I wrote letters I would never send. Pages and pages poured into an old leather journal I found in the drawer beside the bed. Letters to him. Letters to Madison. Letters to myself. Sometimes I signed them. Sometimes I didn't. I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped pretending I was okay. Each morning, I woke up and sobbed on the porch with coffee clenched between my shaking hands. Then I made breakfast. Then I painted. The brush felt clumsy in my hand at first, like touching an old lover after years apart. But it remembered me. The canvas didn't care how long it had been. It just received. And slowly the tears became fewer. There was a bench beneath the oldest pine tree where I liked to sit in the afternoons. The sun filtered through the branches in lace patterns, and the birds sang their indifferent songs. I'd close my eyes and just listen. The forest didn't care that I'd been betrayed. The trees didn't ask why I stayed so long. Nature has a way of holding you without commentary. It forgives before you even ask. On my 4th day there, I started therapy online. I didn't tell the woman much at first, just broad strokes. She had kind eyes and didn't interrupt when I went quiet for minutes at a time. She said, "You don't have to be strong here. You just have to be honest." So I tried. I told her how I used to dream of Paris, how I gave up a Fulbright for a man who said, "You can always go later." Later never came. I told her about the ring, the drawer, the siphoned money, the gaslighting that never quite felt like gaslighting until I saw it all laid out in numbers. She listened like it mattered, like I mattered. That alone felt revolutionary. Started walking into town twice a week, just for groceries at first. Then I saw a flyer for a local gallery needing volunteers. I showed up, introduced myself with a name that didn't feel small in my mouth. I didn't tell them who I was or where I came from. I just said, "I love art," and they let me stay. I helped hang paintings, greeted visitors, made tea. One of the curators invited me to submit a piece for the upcoming exhibit. I said, maybe. The idea of being seen again both thrilled and terrified me, but for the first time, it felt like an option. Nights were the hardest. The bed was wide and cold, and I would sometimes reach for a body that no longer earned my warmth. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, counting regrets instead of sheep. But the ache dulled. Not because I forgot, but because I stopped needing the pain to prove I had loved. Sometimes healing feels like erosion, subtle, slow, almost imperceptible. Until one day, you run your fingers over the place where it used to hurt, and find only skin. One morning, I made tea and stepped outside to find that the air had changed. The scent of spring was beginning to drift through the pines. Subtle but certain. I looked at the steam curling from my mug, watched a bird land on the railing, felt the old necklace resting against my chest. My grandmother's, the only thing of hers I had left. She would have told me to stop hiding, to reclaim, to return, not to him, but to myself. And I realized then, I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding. I found her through a recommendation on a women's legal forum, a small detail buried in a thread titled, "When They Tried to Erase You Financially." Her name was Evelyn Chen, high-asset divorce specialist, former forensic accountant, no-nonsense, sharp-witted, and most importantly, a woman who didn't flinch when I said, "I think he planned this from the beginning." I sat across from her in a small, elegant office where nothing was out of place, not even the tension. I had brought everything: flash drives, bank statements, emails, screenshots, even a printed spreadsheet I'd color-coded during one particularly sleepless night at the cottage. The ring wasn't on my finger anymore, but I could still feel its phantom weight when I looked down at my hands. Evelyn flipped through the documents without blinking. "Intentional economic abuse," she said, almost gently. "It's more common than people realize. They build dependency so you won't leave. Then they hide everything so you can't." I stared at her, my throat tightening. There was something terrifying about hearing the truth spoken so plainly, so clinically, so calmly. I thought it was just me being naive, I whispered. "No," she said, looking me in the eye. It was him being strategic. That was the first moment I let myself feel angry, not just broken. We combed through everything. Every wire transfer disguised as a vendor payment. Every business expense that led to a boutique or a spa I'd never visited. And Madison, always just a few lines away. Booking trips, approving invoices, using my inheritance to buy a future I wasn't invited to be part of. "There are irregularities in the company's accounting," Evelyn said one afternoon, tapping her manicured nail against a document. "If I were a federal agent, I'd be asking questions." She didn't smile, but I saw it, the spark of satisfaction in her eyes. Not gloating, not revenge. Just a woman watching another woman finally stop drowning. I let out a shaky breath. "So, what do we do?" She leaned back. "We build your case, quietly, thoroughly, and when we're ready, we strike." I nodded. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. From adrenaline. Back at the cottage, I started rearranging my life piece by piece. I took a part-time job at the gallery, not just volunteering anymore. The first check they handed me was small, barely enough to cover groceries, but I clutched it like it was sacred. I framed it later, just for myself. The first dollar I ever made again as me. I moved into a small studio above a used bookstore run by a retired couple named Len and June. The space was drafty, the plumbing groaned, and the stairs creaked like an old man's knees. But the windows overlooked the river, and every morning, light spilled across my floor like a benediction. No one knew where I was, not even him, until I stopped answering. The first email came a few days later. No subject line. Just, "Are you okay?" Then another, Let's talk. Then the calls. I never answered. I let them ring out while I painted or made tea or helped hang a new exhibit. His voice became a distant hum behind the sound of birdsong. And brush strokes. Then came the guilt bombs. You're being dramatic. We can fix this. You're blowing things out of proportion. As if I hadn't spent years shrinking to fit the corners of his expectations. I blocked his number. He tried calling from Madison's. I blocked that too. Evelyn called me weekly, sometimes twice. I started looking forward to her voice, so clear, so grounded. We've got what we need, she said one evening, as I stood barefoot in my studio, watching dusk pour over the town. Prenup drafts, asset transfers, hidden accounts, enough to take him for everything he didn't think you'd notice. I let the words settle like dust on old furniture. But what do you want? She asked. It stopped me cold. No one had asked me that in years. Not what's next. Not how will you respond. Just, what do you want? I closed my eyes. I thought of the ring I'd left behind. The perfume that had clung to his shirt. The photographs I'd once taken of us that now lived in a box I couldn't bring myself to burn. I want to be free, I whispered, and I want him to know I saw it all. Every lie, every file, every quiet theft. Then we're almost there. The gallery held a local showcase that spring. My painting was in it, a large canvas, thick with color and grief and survival. I called it Reclamation. People stopped in front of it. Some lingered. One woman cried. The piece sold. Not for much, but enough. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen. About putting something of mine out into the world that hadn't been filtered through his approval or reshaped to suit his business, dinners, or censored to protect his image. And still, the messages came. They changed tone. Guilt turned to blame, then to fear. You don't understand what you're doing. You're hurting yourself by ignoring me. You're acting unstable. The word unstable made my hands curl into fists. It was projection. I knew that now. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about exposure. The man who had once checked my lipstick before dinners, who had replaced my dreams with his to-do list, was finally feeling the hollowness of my absence. But he hadn't even noticed I was gone. Not really. Until I stopped making space for him in my silence. One day, I walked down to the riverbank behind the bookstore with my journal, the one full of unsent letters. The pages fluttered in the breeze, some tear-streaked, some furious. All honest. I sat for a long time, listening to the water. I didn't need him to apologize anymore. I didn't need him to understand what he did. I just needed to be done needing anything from him at all. So I tore the pages out, one by one, and let them fall into the current. They floated away, like prayers or curses or something in between. Later that night, I lit a candle in my new apartment. No reason, just because I could. I put on music, painted something abstract, slept in a bed that held only me and peace. And when Evelyn called the next morning, she asked again, "Are you ready?" And this time, my answer came without hesitation. Yes. I chose the restaurant carefully, somewhere neutral, quiet, intimate enough to force him to look at me, but not so private that he'd feel emboldened to perform. A place with white tablecloths and candles and brass holders, the kind of place where we once used to sit across from each other and pretend. I called ahead to reserve a corner table. Then I laid out my armor. Black silk blouse, simple gold earrings, no makeup but red lipstick, my grandmother's shade. Her necklace was gone. I'd sold it to help fund the new studio, but her memory remained against my skin like warmth left from a kiss. I carried a folder in my bag, labeled in small serif font, Truth. I didn't eat much that day. My stomach buzzed like it was full of bees. but my mind was still. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. He arrived 5 minutes late, of course, smug, as expected, wearing the charcoal suit I bought him for his promotion dinner 2 years ago. I remembered the way I'd stood, in the boutique, holding that suit against my body like I was measuring its future. It fit him well. But it didn't fit who I was anymore. He smiled like he thought I might forgive him. Or worse, like he thought I might still want him. "Hey," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. He looked around the restaurant. "Didn't realize you'd pick someplace so nostalgic." I didn't answer. He cleared his throat. Tried again. "You look good." I let the silence sit between us. A still lake, unmoving. He shifted. "Look, I'm glad we're doing this like adults," he said. "I think it's for the best. A peaceful separation. No drama. I never meant for any of this to get ugly." Ugly. That was the word he used, as if betrayal were a palate choice, as if siphoning my inheritance, forging documents, and building a life with someone else behind my back were a messy breakup instead of premeditated destruction. "And Madison?" I asked, folding my hands on the table. He gave a tight smile. "That wasn't the reason. She's just something that happened. I've changed. Things changed." I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I slid it across the table like a final course. He looked at it, then back at me. "What's this?" "Truth," I said. He opened it. He turned pale. Inside were pages. Dozens, meticulously organized. Bank statements showing diverted transfers, fake business losses, proof of a secret account in his name, screenshots of emails between him and Madison, personal, professional, financial. The draft prenup he never showed me but shared with his lawyer. The timeline. The financial manipulation. Evelyn's letter and the divorce proposal. Aggressive. Airtight. Devastating. He flipped through the pages faster now, as if rushing could undo what was already written. How did you get this?" I tilted my head. "You thought I didn't know how to use our financial software?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I let the silence speak for me. It was eloquent, cold, pure. "For how long?" he finally asked. "I found the ring 4 months ago." He blinked. What ring?" "Madison's," I said simply. "The one you left in the laundry basket." Realization dawned. His jaw tightened. I leaned forward just a little. "You thought you were writing the ending. But I was just beginning mine." He swallowed hard. "You went through my things." I cut him off, calm as a scalpel. "You went through our life. You hollowed it out with lies. I just documented the rot." His hand trembled slightly as he turned the last page. The last line read, "If you refuse the terms, we go to court. And everything in this folder becomes public." I stood up slowly, placing my napkin on the table like a closing statement. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. But still, no apology, no shame. Just a man stunned that his own story had turned on him. I reached into my wallet and laid down a $20 bill. "For the wine," I said. "The rest is on you." And then I walked out. I didn't look back. Weeks later, the papers were signed. He didn't fight. He couldn't. I kept enough to start again. Not what I had lost, but enough. The gallery offered me more hours. I sold the painting called Reclamation for more than I expected, to a woman who said it made her feel both haunted and whole. I used the money from my grandmother's necklace to lease a larger studio. It had tall ceilings and sun-soaked walls. I painted every day. I didn't paint him, not even once. One morning, I walked past the house. Our house. The hydrangeas were blooming, wild and untamed along the fence line. A for sale sign stood crooked in the yard, like a broken vow. I paused at the gate, not in mourning, but in reverence. That place was a graveyard now, not of memories, but of illusions. He thought he buried me there. He didn't know I'd already left him behind, first in heart, then in mind, and finally in law. Madison moved in with him. I know that because Evelyn's office keeps tabs, for legal reasons. I don't ask for updates, but I read them when they come. They're trying to start a business, some boutique agency. She posted about it online once. I didn't feel anger when I saw it, just distance. They can have each other. They deserve the echoes, the hollowness, the haunted mirrors. Sometimes I still dream about the night I found the ring, the cold shock of metal in my palm, the weight of realization. But now, in the dream, I open my hand and drop it, and it disappears into the forest floor, swallowed by pine needles and time. The perfume is gone. I threw it out. The clothes, donated. The photos, boxed and buried beneath. Paint supplies I no longer reach for. But the scar, that quiet, invisible ache beneath my ribs, it remains. Not as pain, but as proof that I survived something meant to destroy me and rebuilt something stronger in its place. This was never just a story about betrayal. It was a story about seeing clearly, about standing up, about walking away with nothing but the truth and building a life from it. So if you're listening to this, somewhere, sometime, maybe in the middle of your own storm, hear this. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are awake. You are aware. And that is your power. The ending they try to write for you, you can rewrite it. You will.